So the first part of it is just general background stuff, and then we'll get more and more into GSV stuff.
Okay.
And the first thing that we want you to do is tell us your name.
My name is David Salyer.
Okay. And we're here today interviewing David for the Gay Spirit Visions Oral History Project. I'm Cal Goff, one of the interviewers, and with me is Randall Kumba. He is also here. And today is April the 12th. And the first thing that we'd like for you to do is I'm going to read all of these interrelated questions, and then I'll read them again because there's like 7 of them together. And hard to remember. Briefly describe your family background, which we mean by this: the origin and birthplace of your grandparents and parents, your date and place of birth, whether you have any siblings and who they are, your partnership history, and some experiences from your childhood that you believe had a profound effect on your values or your personality or your passions or whoever you are today. So the first part of that is your family background, where your folks came from, and where you were raised.
My mother's family is from Durham, North Carolina, and she had a very big family, so there were lots of aunts and uncles and cousins when I was growing up. And my father's side of the family is from Virginia, and it's the southwestern part of Virginia. And he was born in a coal mining town that doesn't even exist anymore. And so he left immediately upon turning 18. He joined the Army. So my experience growing up was that I was in a military family. And
were you born there?
I was not born there. Okay. I was born in Atlanta at Fort McPherson Army Hospital.
Oh.
And then my dad retired from the military and went back to work for the military. So we moved to Huntsville, Alabama, and he worked at Redstone Arsenal. So all I ever knew was there was always a military connection, and that's all I ever knew. But I did get to live in the same city all the way through grade school, which was not true for my brother and sister. So I have one sister who is 11 years older than me and one brother that is 5 years older than me. And that's quite a gap, actually, for kids. And so...
Are you closer to one than the other?
I'm close to my sister, which, after she went away to college and became an adult, and then as I got older, we made an effort to get together. And but my brother and I just never really had a connection, and I tried for years, but that just didn't work out.
Okay.
So,
and where do they live?
My brother lives in Tennessee, and my sister lives in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay. All right. So tell us how you got to Atlanta.
Let's see. Like I said, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and my parents, when I was in college, my dad retired, and my mother and father moved back to Georgia. They were in the Stone Mountain area. And I was in college, and I decided to transfer to the University of Georgia. So I lived in Athens for 2 years until I finished my degree in journalism. And when I got out of school, I took the first job I could get, which was in Louisiana, which I don't recommend. And then I came back to Georgia for a job, and I eventually ended up at CNN in 1983. And so I've been here ever since, with the exception of a year and a half when I lived in California.
Okay. All right. Your partnership history.
Let's see.
First partner?
I had my first boyfriend we lasted about, I guess it was 9 months. I actually moved in with him.
Was this in college or before
No,
then?
I didn't have a boyfriend or girlfriend or a partner until I was out of school. And working. So, yeah, I was already at CNN. This would have been 1986. It was the first time I had a long-term boyfriend. It lasted 9 months. I moved into his house, and that was a mistake. So I moved out of his house.
Okay.
Let's see. After that, I had, I dated off and on, and then eventually I had a long-term relationship with Kim, who that lasted 6 years, and he remains my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I've since then I have dated some, and I was in a relationship with someone for 3 years, but it was long distance.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came time to decide about whether or not I was going to move to be with him, we had that serious adult conversation, and the answer was no.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I don't really think about partnership so much
Okay.
anymore.
Alrighty. This Kim, you said that he's your best friend.
Uh-huh.
Does he live in Atlanta?
He does live in Atlanta.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I didn't ask you how old you are. If you want to tell us, you can say that. How old you are this very day.
I am 57 years old.
Okay. We need to put that into the thing. I forgot. Okay. Your coming out experience. When was that, and was it one thing?
It's kind of a well, this is always an amusing conversation to me, because from the first grade on, everybody knew I was different. Everybody knew I was different. I was always treated as if there was something different about me. And so you get to a point where you accept that.
Uh-huh.
And then in college, I started to realize that my sexual attraction was for men exclusively. And so I think it was in my senior year, I finally came out to my best friend, who actually was gay as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was easy. That was very easy. And then I got out of college and I took my first job, and I was living away from home, and it was just really challenging. And
This is Louisiana?
yes, this was Louisiana,
Mm-hmm.
Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
And I was struggling with it so much that I finally called my sister, that I mentioned earlier is 11 years older than me, and I said, I'm gay. And she said, well, I don't love you any less, but I would like you to talk to somebody, because it sounds like you're having some hard times with this. And I did actually go see a psychiatrist, and here's the remarkable thing about this. I saw that psychiatrist for months and never once talked about being gay.
Interesting.
I talked about everything else that was wrong in my life or what was going on, but I did not. And I actually attempted suicide, and of course I did not succeed there. And then I left Louisiana, and as the years went on, I just got more and more comfortable with who I was. And then it was in the early, so this was in Louisiana, that was like 1980, 81. So remember, I moved back to Georgia in 83, and Georgia's a town, at least there are other gay people. At least you get that sense that there are just other people like you.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until about 90, 91 that I just sort of came out. I mean, I came out gradually at work because I was in the graphics department at CNN, and there were other gay people, and
Mm-hmm.
people just expect artists to be different or
Mm-hmm.
in some way. So, it was around 90, 91 that I finally sort of just came out to everybody in the whole world, because I was writing for Southern Voice, which was the gay and lesbian newspaper in town. I was doing freelance work for them, and I got interviewed. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution contacted me because they were looking to do a series on out gay people in Atlanta, and they found my name in the Southern Voice, so that they contacted me. So I did this series, and then this is what's remarkable about this story is I just assumed by this point my parents would have known, and my mother actually says she did know, but she didn't want to see it in the newspaper. And my father just had a meltdown about it, and the funniest thing about it is that he never really talked to me about it. My mother and I talked about it extensively, and she actually accepted it. But my father, I mean, he died, and I have no idea exactly what he thought or felt, and it's weird. But she said that my father always just thought I was a sissy. He never understood that I was gay.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand, in my head, I really don't know what that means exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he didn't really get it. So
Yeah. Oh.
I don't know what I could have done. I don't know. I suppose I could have called them up and said, hey, there's going to be this article about me in the paper. But I honestly thought they knew. I really did. And then the very next year, I was on Action News. Channel 2 did this series on gay people in Atlanta, and they contacted me to be in this. And I did call my parents up at that point. I know, actually, I went out to their house and sat down and said, I need to tell you something.
Oh.
And they did thank me for telling them in advance so that they could,
And they were living where?
They were living in Stone Mountain.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were reading the AJC.
So they were reading Yes, and
and
they were
watching TV.
Yes, they were watching Yes. And,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So I want to go back to the first question because I left out part of that, and that is, if you can think of an experience or a person like a mentor or somebody back in your childhood that had a profound effect on you for years after that, whether it is related to you being gay or not being gay, just were there such people or experiences that you think?
My experience is that men never knew exactly what to do with me.
Uh-huh.
So my mentors were always women. I find that women were the ones who treated me the best and were willing to spend time with me.
Mm-hmm.
And
was there one in particular? Teacher or something?
I think I had encouragement all along the way. I had a teacher. I think it was my 3rd or 4th grade teacher who said, you're a pretty good writer, and she based this on the fact that every time they'd give us an assignment to use all the spelling words, to write a story using all the spelling words,
Yeah.
she thought my stories were the best.
Uh-huh.
So there was all, and I would do things like I would win an award in the science fair or the history fair or whatever, and I was always in all the PTA shows where you had to learn to sing and dance. It was always in those,
Yeah.
much to my father's dismay.
Uh-huh.
And my mother actually would, she would go and she would try to be supportive about that. But here's the thing, when you're a little boy and they want to do a show and they're trying to cast 6 boys to dance, what will typically happen is you will get one boy who will volunteer. That was me.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to make 5 other boys do it.
Yeah.
So I was that boy who was always volunteering to learn to square dance or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were always women.
Uh-huh.
There was, and always the woman who taught music at our school, she was always encouraging us, male and female, to learn to find our voices, and always.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know. I just went all the way through grade school, and my recollection is that it was the women that were the ones who were the most.
And this was Alabama.
Yeah, this was Alabama.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
like I said, I don't think of men as mentors. I don't think I ever have.
Okay. Anything else from your kidhood that you connect to the person you are today? Some kind of intuition you had, or experience, or trip, or exposure to something, finding books, how you ever became a writer, how early that went, any of that?
I used to escape into television because it was, I wasn't interested in sports, and so this was fun for me to watch television, to watch Bewitched or Lost in Space and all those shows from back then. But I actually read quite a bit as a child. I read all kinds of books and things, and I don't necessarily think any one of them stood out for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a kid who was content to sit alone and read a book or watch television in my room, which is what they did when I was like 6 or 7 years old. They actually gave me this black and white portable TV to put in my bedroom so that I wouldn't fight with my father about what to watch on the television in the den.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, and before I forget later on to ask you this, one of the things that I know about you is this whole comic talent that you have. And so I'd kind of like to hear a little bit about how that manifested first as an adult and what it was connected to in the past. Like, did those theatricals help you
I
with
can
that?
tell you exactly. Let me tell you.
Okay.
When I went out on the playground for the first day in the first grade at recess, the boys went off to the jungle gym and the girls went off the jump rope.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think I ended up? I jumped rope.
Mm-hmm.
So when you establish from the very first day of grade school that you are not like the other boys,
Yeah.
you've got to figure out how to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, I must have discovered that I could make people laugh, that I was funny,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like an armor. And the truth is, if you can get people to laugh, they won't beat you up.
Mm-hmm.
That's really how that works.
Okay.
So yeah, and then as I got older and older, I think I just learned to live with that, and I enjoyed making people laugh.
Okay. So, am I remembering correctly that you've done some performances in Atlanta and all? How did that come about? I mean,
Yeah.
It wasn't a protective thing. It was
No. I did some stand-up stuff. Actually, I was in the '90s when I was very actively involved in HIV and AIDS work. There was an organization, Positive Impact, that wanted to do a night of stand-up comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and so you would, your ticket was a donation to the agency,
Mm-hmm.
and so they recruited a bunch of people that had no experience. And then we worked with two people who did it professionally,
Oh.
so we could get our act together.
Uh-huh.
And I remember at the end of that process, the two professionals came to me and said, you really got it, so
Uh-huh.
we're going to let you go last because we want to end with something big.
Uh-huh.
And I was really flattered, and of
Mhm.
course I was so nervous. I mean, I'm honestly, standing up in front of a room and delivering that, something you've memorized that's like 12 minutes,
Mhm.
but you have to wait for the laughs, and it's nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
I mean, I have such an appreciation for people that do that for a living.
Uh-huh.
So, but yeah, I did it for, it was an AIDS benefit, and then from that I kept getting invitations
Mm.
to do it. So I did it for about, I don't know, maybe a year and a half. I just kept doing it, and I got some new material and worked it out, and
Mhm.
and after that I thought, this is exhausting. I don't think I can do this. So I had a nice ride, about a year and a half.
Okay. Well, thanks for telling us about that. In a few minutes, we're going to get into the GSV saga, but before we do that, if you could kind of isolate the pre-GSV era in terms of your spiritual path, whatever that means to you, what was it? What kind of religious background or spiritual path had you explored before ever hearing of a GSV?
Sure, yeah. As a child, growing up in Huntsville, my parents were not religious. My mother identified as Baptist, but my father never discussed religion, but he was agnostic. And so there was no real pressure on me to go to church, but I remember when I was like 7 years old, this truck came through our neighborhood advertising Vacation Bible School.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What's that?" And my mother goes, "Oh, well, this church is doing something. Do you want to go?" That's really the whole explanation. The church is doing something. Do you want to go?
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I think I'd like to do that." So I went to Vacation Bible School, and that was my first experience of a church. Believe it or not, I don't remember having been to church on Easter or anything. And Vacation Bible School was so ridiculous. I mean, the only thing I can remember about it is that there was one day when we made a Bible out of a bar of soap and construction paper and glitter.
Uh-huh.
That's all I can remember about it.
You don't remember the little assemblies where they bring in the flag, the Christian flag?
I do not. I may have just blocked it out. Oh, the other thing I remember is that the preacher from the church, Brother Armstrong, at one point during Vacation Bible School, he brought us all down and he wanted us to, he was trying to get us all to accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
Well, I'm 7 and I don't have any idea what he's talking about. I really don't. And there were kids that just got up and walked up, because there were like a dozen of us. But literally, there were kids that got up and walked up there. And this one woman, one of the teachers came over and she goes, "It's okay, honey." You don't have to go this time. So that's
Like walking the plank.
right, honestly. But I just thought, hell. Anyway, so yeah, and I actually ended up going to that church for Sunday school. And again, my parents were not going there for services. I just went for vacation Bible school and then Sunday school. And so I'm, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I probably was with that church for 4 or 5 years maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a teenager, my best friend in school was a Roman Catholic. And I went to church a couple of times with him, and I listened to him talk about it, and I think I went to Mass a couple of times. And then when I went away to school, my first year at college, I decided I was going to convert to Catholicism. And I did. I actually found the priest at the local parish. I talked to him about it, and I went through catechism classes with him. I was alone. I was the only one. It was just the priest and me doing catechism. And then I was, I'd never been baptized, so I was baptized and confirmed in the Catholic Church when I was 18 years old.
In Athens?
No, I was in Alabama at a small college before I transferred to the University of Georgia.
Okay.
So yeah, I did that.
Now, was this under the influence of this friend, or just
No, because
what was it about?
No, he and I were not in school, and I just felt like I needed this. I felt like I needed something. There was something missing from my life, and I had to do this. And he had gone off, believe it or not, he had gone off to St. Pius X Seminary, which is in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the church was paying for him to go to the University of Scranton, I guess is what's there. And then in his junior year, he came out.
Ah.
So, and then the next year, in my senior year in college, I came out to him. And so that's how that all played out. But yeah, I became a Roman Catholic, and my parents even came to the service where I was baptized and confirmed. And I remember my mother crying. I remember that. And she wasn't crying because she was disappointed. She wasn't. I mean, she thought it was fine that I had found something that was working for me. My father didn't have any real opinion about it at all that I can recall.
Okay. So that was 18. What did your college education and being that age do with that?
Well, I went, I was a pretty good Catholic for 5 or 6 years, I think, and practicing, going to church, and going to confession when I missed, and things like that. But there was one incident where I was in church for Mass, and in the Catholic Church, you don't have a sermon, you have the homily. And during the homily, instead of the priest talking, they had replaced it with this, like a film strip, which sounds like an old-fashioned word, but it was before you had PowerPoint. Think PowerPoint, but it was like a PowerPoint presentation about abortion. And so and I was at this church that was like one of those massive warehouse churches that was packed with people, and we were all trapped watching this presentation on abortion and how it was bad. And I remember 2 things about it. I remember that one single woman got up and walked out, and I don't think I ever went back after that day.
Oh. You thought it was intrusive? You thought it was... What did you object about?
I objected to them using the homily. If the priest had stood up there and he wanted to say something about abortion, if he'd wanted to use the homily to talk about abortion, I even if I might have disagreed with him, I would have been respectful. But you don't drag out the PowerPoint in the middle of church and force everybody to sit there and watch this presentation.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It was just didn't have any class.
Okay.
Plus, honestly, I was already having misgivings because I realized this is the Catholic Church. I'm an openly gay person. I'm not really invited to this party. So that was the last straw for me.
Okay.
The abortion and then the gay stuff. It was just the last straw.
Okay. So, before you heard about GSV, were there other things, other spiritual type things that you were exploring, or seeds that had been planted in you by others, or anything, or not?
I was not exploring anything. I was aware that I did not really have a spiritual path, but I wasn't exploring.
Mhm.
And it was 92, I guess. Yes, 1992. I had a. No, I'm going to back up.
Okay.
From 87 to 89, I dated somebody. I would hesitate to call it a relationship, but we did date for 2 years, so there's that.
Mm-hmm.
But he was on sabbatical from the Lutheran Church. He was a Lutheran minister who had taken time off because he was trying to decide about his calling.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were together during that 2 years. And I knew he was struggling with his own spirituality and
Mm-hmm.
whether to go back to the church or not. He did not go back to the church. But that gave me an awareness of how people do struggle with this kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which is not something I'd really seen at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 92, when he and I were still friends, I was visiting him, and it was the first time I heard about GSB because he handed me the brochure that had come in the mail
Mm-hmm.
and said, "This looks like something you'd be into."
Why do you think he said that to you?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Oh.
I have no idea. I never followed up with him on why would you think I would be into this.
Uh-huh.
But I do remember specifically he just handed it to me and said, "This looks like something you'd be into."
Did he ever go himself?
He never went. No.
Okay. So this was 92, you
Mhm.
said. All right. What was going on with you that made you receptive to that suggestion, do you think? Why did it matter that he said that to you?
I think that over time he and I had conversations about religion and faith and spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was kind of always bubbling under the surface for me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that this was something he saw, and he made the connection. Okay, well, if you're searching for something, there's this group. Why
Yeah.
not try that?
Uh-huh. And so, do you remember the process of deciding whether you would go or not go, or?
I can tell you, this is so funny, but I can tell you exactly the process, and I know that
Oh, good.
this is what so he handed me the brochure, which came in a square envelope, not a rectangular envelope, but it was a square envelope, and then the actual brochure itself opened up into a box that was set on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And the four sides of the box, it said shadow, power, gifts, touch. And I thought that was just the coolest thing. I'm a very visual person,
Mm-hmm.
so this made me think that these people were serious in some way,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. But yeah, I kept this because it's the most interesting brochure I think the organization ever put out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my favorite one too. So, is there any one thing about this notion of going to this conference that most appealed to you? Was it the power of the touch, the shadow, or was it all together, or is it just, well, I'll try this? Just, I'm an experimental person, I'll give it a shot.
It was more that I'm an experimental person, and I like to put myself into situations that are potentially challenging for me
Uh-huh.
and could bring up stuff for me, and that was certainly true of this conference. So yeah, I went because this is an experiment, and
Okay.
you might as well try it.
Were you still at CNN?
I was still at CNN.
Okay. So, were you in a relationship with you, or with this, still friends with this guy?
I had just
right?
started dating. I'd started dating Kim. It was June of '92,
Mhm.
and the conference was in September of '92. So I was just getting to know him really.
Okay. All right. Was there any chance that he was going to come with you? Was that part of the
I
deal?
didn't even discuss it with him.
Okay. So, now we're going to get into the memories that you have of that first conference.
Okay.
Tell us what it felt like to drive up there. And how did you get there? Did you go alone? Did you not go alone?
I went alone. I drove up that crazy winding mountain road to get to the mountain retreat center, and parked and went in to register. And this was the conference. It was on it started on Fridays back then, not Thursdays, but it started on Fridays. And so you got there before lunch, and then you could have lunch. And so the guy who registered me said, all right, well, you're all done, so you can just go on to the cafeteria, dining hall, and eat, because people are already down there. And I said, okay. So I walked down there, and I could hear this, just like all these voices, and there was laughter and just crazy human sounds. And I thought, well, I'm not eating lunch today. So I went and found my cabin, and my cabin was one of the little weird ones that had like 2 twin beds and a bathroom in it. And I went in and I sat on the bed, and I had to talk myself out of leaving. So I didn't leave, but I came close. And then I remember...
Well, stop right there and talk about that anxiety. What were the anxieties? Feeling on the outside of something or something else? What was it about? If you can remember.
I just remember feeling like I've made a mistake. I'm not going to fit in here. This is going to be terrible, and I don't know. And all these people are so much more enlightened and filled with laughter than I am, and I'm not going to be able to do this.
Okay.
And so then I sat on the bed and I talked to myself. And what's funny is, after lunch they did workshops, because again the schedule was very odd back then. So there was lunch, and then there was workshops, and then later you had your opening ritual. So you were doing things with people before everybody had gathered together really in one room and had any kind of introduction. So there was a workshop right after lunch, and it was called I think I actually have it was called, pretty sure it was called Coming In. Coming In, yes, it was offered at 1 p.m. and it was called Coming In, and it was led by John Stowe. And it says, John Stowe will lead a series of visualizations, breathing, and movement exercises designed to help participants get present and centered at the mountain. Well, that's really all I needed to see. Those words, that was enough for me to go, okay, well, I'll go, and this guy will get me centered and present at the mountain. And so I went into the room, and John Stowe was one of the most wonderful people I think I've ever met in my entire life. And so he had us at one point, we were wandering around the room and doing things, and we were supposed to be loosening up and relaxing. And he came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders, and he said, "You're so tight. Let your hair down." I will never forget that. And I thought, and that didn't exactly work in the moment, because I felt like, oh my God, there are hands on me. But I finally did say, I think this will be okay. This guy seems all right, and with his encouragement. So yeah, I got through it. But that first hour or two was really hard for me. And then...
Do you remember how you talked yourself into it? Did you were going to just feel terrible if you
mostly,
didn't stay?
I can tell you, because this is probably how I still do it. If I'm really scared about doing something, then I will have a conversation about how ridiculous I'm being.
Okay.
That you paid money for this and you drove all this way, and there's nothing scary about this, people. It's not a Friday the 13th film. Yeah. No one's going to kill you. It's come on, just relax about this. Okay. And so yeah, that's how I do it usually. Okay.
All right. So what else do you remember about that first conference? If you can, unlike me, isolate the first conference from all the other ones. They all kind of mushed together for me. So do you remember vividly your first conference, what happened there, and some of the highlights for you?
I can remember that there were somewhere, I think, between 90 and 100 of us there. And can remember quite a few things, but I can narrow it down to a couple. So yeah, there were like between 90 and 100 guys there. And I had this awareness the first time we were all in the room together, that I had dated and or slept with 7 men in that room, which I thought was a fairly high percentage. So I was a little bit freaked out. And I shared that. I thought, if I just take the power out of this by sharing it in the opening heart circle. In the opening heart circle, I've always found that they're very, I don't know, that's where you get the sense that we're all in this together, and maybe some of us are scared, but it's going to be okay, and just share, relax, and breathe. And, you know, if you need to hold somebody's hand, then do that, and all that. And what I remember very, very vividly about this is when I shared that thing about the 7 guys, some guy in the room booed. And I had no idea what that meant or where that came from. And I thought, was that not something I was supposed to share? Was I not supposed to talk about the fact that I've been intimate with 7 people in this room? What's okay? What are the rules here? What's off limits and what's not okay? And then I got around to saying, oh, you know what? Fuck you, actually, buddy. That's kind of where I got back to. And there was a real test for me, too, because what I remembered about those 7 guys is that I'd actually forgotten to break up with like 5 of them. So I had to have some integrity around that, and I had to address that in the context of the conference.
Did you get around to all 7 before it was over with?
I did.
Think? You did?
I did.
Okay. And was that interesting?
It was...
Was it different with each one?
There were 2 who were like, I really don't know what happened, because they were very much into me, and so they really didn't know what happened, and then so they got an explanation, and they thanked me for that. And then the rest of them were like, yeah, I know, whatever. So, you know, I knew we weren't going to be a couple, so they were fine with it. But yeah, there were 2 that required a little bit more of a conversation. And I remember that so vividly about that conference, is that I needed to do that, to really develop some integrity around how I treat men.
Interesting. So, just reassociate some more about, don't narrow things down to a couple of things. Go ahead and talk about the first conference, what it was like for you. What other workshops were kind of neat that you remember, or parts of the conference that were your favorites?
I remember the talent show was done for people who don't know the mountain and its layout, there's a building called the Lodge. And then there was another building called the Tree House, which was a much bigger space, which had a stage and room for you to do dances or plays or talent shows. But that hadn't been built in '92. And so we were forced to do a talent show in the Lodge, great room, which is not a huge room. And I remember all of us being crammed in there and yet still making room for people to perform. And there was one... I don't remember anything else about the performances, except there was one guy who came in and sat down at the piano, and he was in a leather harness and leather chaps, and he was really hairy, and he played something classical on the piano. And I was totally blown away by that. And so that is the most vivid memory I have of the talent show.
Were you in the talent show yourself?
I was not in the talent. It would be years before I would go to the talent show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Well, if you'll just talk a little bit more about the opening circle, heart circle thing, if there was anything about that you. It something you had done before some other places? Was it totally new to you?
I had never done a heart circle where people just share spontaneously from their heart. I'd never done that. You know, I'd been in meetings where you were supposed to check in, and that we all knew that the check-in was not supposed to last longer than 12 seconds. So the heart circle experience was completely new to me.
Was it one of those long ones?
It was really not a long one. I mean, we've sat through some long ones. Seriously long ones. But this one was not particularly long. And I do remember that some people were in chairs and some people were on the floor. And it had a more I think they became more structured. You know, everybody sat in chairs as the years progressed, and they were put in circles and things like this. But that first one in '92 was kind of up and down, and everybody was in different places. And like I said, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing or sharing, and then just sharing the piece about having been with 7 guys in the room. I can't remember anything anybody else said. I have no recollection of anything that anybody else said. I will say this. After I did that, the next time we were, like the next day when we were in a room together, and we were all together as a group, there was a guy who came over and sat down next to me and said, "I'm going to sit next to you." And I had no idea what that was about, and it made me really nervous. Mm-hmm. Plus, he was cute. Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, he just wants to fuck. Uh-huh. That's a continuing theme for the conferences is why are people being nice to you? Do they just want to have sex with you, or what's going on? Because you know, if you put 100 men on a mountaintop with no television,
right. That's a good way to put it.
So yeah, I wasn't sure.
Okay.
But no, that the conference was me getting over my fear and me developing some integrity around the way I treat men, and I guess getting a sense that your spiritual path does not have to involve organized religion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember if there was a drumming circle or some kind of nighttime doo-wah?
There was a drumming circle, and there were a lot of guys out there. And here's something that I find amusing is there's so many guys will swear that people drummed naked around the fire circle, and I have never once seen that. I've seen guys as close to naked as possible, like in their underwear or some makeshift loincloth that they'd come up with, or some festive pair of pants that they brought that were just barely covering anything. I've seen a lot of that. Yeah. And I did love the fire because there's just something very primal about the fire and what it brings out in people, because it can bring out the dancing, but also the people who sat on those benches to just have those little conversations. Mm-hmm. I like that a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And I found over the years that's what I mostly did, was I sat and had those little conversations with people, because I feel like you don't always get to know people. There's so much going on, and if you can find a quiet moment to sit down, sometimes you forget people are drumming.
Okay. Well, just a personal note here. I think I remember you saying that thing about the 7 people and thinking how wonderful that was, that it was a startling thing to hear, but it was like an honest thing too. And I thought, there's probably a bunch of people in this boat, and it made me glad that was going to be the level of risk for, so I don't think I'm hallucinating that I heard that there. So
I remember very vividly saying it, so perhaps if that resonated with you.
I had forgotten about that, but that helped make that conference.
We were in the same small group together that year.
We were? Okay. Well, can you talk a little bit about the small group thing, just as a device? Do you think was it powerful for you? Was it something you'd seen a lot of, so it wasn't that big of a deal? Do you think it's crucial? Are you glad they still have them?
I love the small group experience, and I do think they're crucial. There's one part of it I would change, and I'll get to that, but I'm going to talk about that first small group in 1992. And my recollection of it is that it was being led by Peter Kendrick, and that you and I were in it, and I know Don Hedden was in it, and then there were a couple of guys in it that I don't think have ever been back. And one of the guys was developmentally disabled. And he had part of his disability was that he couldn't hear. And so there was a guy who did sign language there, Miguel. And so they asked him if he would sign. So he ended up signing the entire conference for this guy.
Wow.
And he was in our small group
Mm-hmm.
because he wasn't really in our small group, but he got assigned to it because we had the man. And I wish I could remember his name,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I remember so clearly about it is that this was such a lovely group. And then there was this one guy who, when we were getting into it and the signing was happening, this one guy just like said, I don't think I could do this. And it was really clear to me that it wasn't that he couldn't do the group.
Mm-hmm.
It was that he was having challenges around being in the group with someone who had disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I don't know how that looks when you sign it,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt like very protective of him.
Uh-huh.
And he was such a lovely man too,
Mhm.
and participated. And so the guy who wasn't sure he could sit in a group with the rest of us, he calmed down.
Uh-huh.
I have no other memory of him. So
Okay, so what were you feeling at the end of the conference? What did this conference feel like? You told us how it felt like when you first got there, and then so how did it sort of develop, and what was it like when you left?
I remember thinking it afterwards. Well, that was okay. I got through that, and that was tricky because I had to talk to 7 guys, and I had to do all those things,
Yeah.
and I made it through the workshops and the small group, and that was fine. I could do this again.
Uh-huh.
If I had anything, if there was anything negative going on in my head, it was probably something about how this could have been organized a lot better, because that's where my head always goes. So. But yeah, I mean, I remember having a good enough experience that I would want to come back. And in fact, I joined the what was called the planning committee
Uh-huh.
for the next year.
Okay. The some of the things that were done in the workshop and the circles, the Native American stuff or whatever it was then, I don't remember what, it might have been in 92. Were those like from Mars to you, or was that sort of part of your, it wasn't alienating, it was these other traditions, these non-religious things, these pagan-y things, were they threatening in any way, or were they just interesting?
They weren't threatening to me.
Okay.
There were things I had not really seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I'd not participated in a heart circle. I'd not had a small group process like it was presented there.
Mm-hmm.
And just some of the terminology, the words, the songs
Mm-hmm.
that they sang, things like that was all new to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, I went with the ones I liked, and then I thought, well, this will be over.
Yeah.
If I didn't like it, it'll be over in a minute.
Okay. All right. How was this conference different than the way you expected it to be, as you were like driving up there thinking about it, like what it might be like? Was it very different? Was it similar to sort of what you thought? Was it a mixture? Was it, were you surprised by what you found?
I was surprised. But I also, with things like this, I try not to develop a lot of expectations before I arrive.
Oh my, and you succeed in not having them?
Probably.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a talent. Okay. So it just kind of unfolded in the way it did, and it was not jarring
Yeah.
to you, because that's, okay.
I mean, I knew what my work was there. My work was to go and address the 7 men. I knew what my work was.
Okay. All right. So how often did you go to GSV conferences? What's your history with going to them?
I've been, they had the 25th anniversary conference last fall in 2014, and I believe I've been to 18 of the 25.
Okay. what factors influence your decision to attend or not attend a conference? And these might have changed over the years because you were obligated. You obligated yourself to be a planner.
Yeah. When you were on what was originally called the planning committee, and then it evolved into the council. When you were part of those things, there was an expectation that you were going to go, and I never had any problem with that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, after I fulfilled years of service, in 2010, I decided to take a break. So I took 3 years off and then came back for the 25th anniversary conference. And I wanted to go back for a couple of reasons. It was the 25th year, yes, and I was grateful that all those other guys had got us that far.
Mm-hmm.
But also I liked the keynote speaker they had chosen. It was John Stasio from Easton Mountain, and I really wanted to hear him speak because I'd never met him.
Uh-huh.
And then there was also the person that was convening that year was Scott Dillard, and I love Scott Dillard, so I wanted to be there to support him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I had 3 reasons. Now, I don't know what will happen this year. I don't know, because I haven't seen any kind of plans.
So the content or the people involved are factors in whether you go or not go on any given
It would be
year?
now, since I'm not part of the planning process.
Okay.
Now it's going to be a question of, like, well, who did they invite to speak and who's in charge? And yeah.
Okay. Do you remember do you have any favorite keynotes over the years? Any high points?
I do. I was thinking about this when you asked me to do this project. The first keynote that I remember vividly was from 1995, and it was Malcolm Boyd. Malcolm Boyd is such a fascinating guy. And actually, he just died like 2 months ago. I don't even think it's been 2 months yet. He was an A-list producer in old Hollywood, and then I think in the 50s he became an Episcopal priest. And during that time he wrote Are You Running With Me, Jesus?, which is a collection of contemporary prayers, and he did all this social activism, and he was in Selma with Dr. King. So he was such an amazing guy. And then in the 70s he just came out, and then the church was not so happy about that, and I believe he ultimately left the church. But then I also remember that in the 80s he was one of the first people who did an AIDS mass. And I think when that was just not happening. It was 1985, I'm pretty sure. So he was such a fascinating keynote speaker. He was 72 at the time. So he had all this stuff in his history. And he brought his partner, Mark Thompson, who was 30 years younger. And you would watch them together and you would think, well, how does that work exactly? Except it obviously did. So that was a way of, for me, it was a way of me confronting ageism, for instance, and intergenerational relationships. And so, yeah, Mark Thompson, I just have to say this about Mark Thompson. Okay. So he comes up there, and Mark Thompson is he's an author and an editor, and he is one of the voices. He was one of the contemporary voices of the BDSM movement in this country, and this was really exciting that we had this. That was a combo. Malcolm Boyd and Mark Thompson was a combo.
Yeah.
So Mark Thompson, they decided that they were going to give him a workshop slot, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to this primarily because he's really hot. And so I go to this, and first of all, there's a description. I just have to say, because I brought this deliberately, I wanted to be able to read this description.
Okay.
So Mark Thompson's workshop was called Dark Eros, SM Play as Spiritual Work. And I thought, okay, sure, I'll do that. Some readings and observations from Mark Thompson, who will facilitate a discussion of exploring our feelings, fantasies, and attractions to radical sexuality. Okay, so I go into this workshop. It's limited to 30 people. It's full. And Mark Thompson talks for a couple of minutes, and then he asks us all to pair off for a spanking exercise. We're going to spank each other. Now, that's not in the description.
You thought it was going to be a talking thing.
Yeah. So what's funny is, everybody seemed to be on board with this. And a guy walked up to me immediately and said, well, let's pair off. Let's do this. And I thought, sure, because I look like somebody who wants to be spanked today. And then it was like, you guys need to determine who's going first. Who's going to get spanked first. And of course the guy goes, I'll spank you. He was very assertive about it. I'll give him that much credit. So and this felt like it was going on forever, but it wasn't. It all was happening in 37 seconds.
Yeah.
And I finally just said, I think I'm not going to do this. And I turned around and I walked out and closed the door behind me. And then I had all these feelings about it, and guilt, and just everything was all just churning inside of me. And so I saw the guy at lunch, the one that wanted to spank me. I saw him and I walked up to him and I said, I just need for you to know that when I left, it was not personal. It didn't have anything to do with you. And he went, oh yeah, I knew that. So that was another real lesson for me. All that agony that I went through.
Wasted time.
Wasted.
Funny. Okay, other, other, in that drawer. Other keynotes
Other
that you
keynotes.
remember kind of fondly? Or?
Well, this is probably going to be, when I was presiding elder for 3 years, so 2008, 2009, 2010. And I really loved the 3 keynotes that we invited. The first year, 2008, it was Clyde Hall, who's a Native American, and I thought it was about time that since we had borrowed or adopted so many Native American rituals, I thought it might be nice if we actually had a Native American speaker come in and talk to us.
Yes, well.
And so we did that.
Yeah.
And I will say that I don't remember a whole lot about Clyde's keynote. What I remember is that the question and answer period was fantastic, which is often what happens with keynotes. Is they get through the thing, and then it's the questions that they get and the spontaneous nature of that whole interaction that works so much better. So, but I loved Clyde, and he's a friend today. And then the next year, we invited Peterson Toscano, who was a performance activist, and Peterson had spent 17 years in ex-gay therapy before he finally got out of that and said, you know what, I'm just gay. And so he had this thing where he took Bible stories and he looked for the potentially transgendered characters, and then he acted them out.
I remember that.
And it was fascinating, and you'd think, oh my God, this is not going to be good. Except it was good, and it was seamless, and he was a complete professional, and he could do so much with just the smallest of costume changes. And so I loved that. And again, when he was done, and we hadn't had somebody get up and do a performance that I could ever remember, really.
True. Yeah.
So he got through that, and then we had the question and answer. And of course, the questions, there were some about what he had done, but a lot of it was about spending 17 years in ex-gay therapy. And again, I don't think we'd ever had anybody who could tell us about that experience. So that was great. And then the next year, 2010, I thought, because we opened the door on the transgender stuff, I thought, well, what if we actually invited somebody who is transgender? And I got the council on board with this. And they said, well, just bring us some names and we'll just talk about it all. Or send us some links and we'll look at so I did. I sent them. And the first person that we wanted, he was not available. And the next person, which was Bear Bergman, Bear was available. And I had to go back and forth with him in email and then a phone call for him to get comfortable with what we were asking him to do. Because he's used to, he was female to male transgender. So what he's used to doing is going to a college or going to someplace and speaking for an hour and a half and leaving. What we were asking him to do was come for an entire weekend. Not just a weekend, but get there on Wednesday or Thursday and then not leave until Sunday afternoon. And to go through this process with everybody. You're going to eat meals with them, you're going to go to a small group with them. And so I had to kind of get him to be okay with that idea. So there was nobody on the council was against this idea. Nobody. We all thought it was great. when he got there, it became pretty clear pretty fast that there were people that had a problem with him. And that was my last year on the council. I'd already told everybody, you know, this is it for me. I'm rolling off. I've done it. It's time to get off the stage. And if I hadn't already made that decision, I would have left just because of the way I felt that they treated him. I think it was just not in character for our organization, and I was very disappointed.
Okay. I want you to talk a little bit about the transition from the time when you know, it had mostly been Atlanta people and the whole burnout story and the mixed feelings of turning it over and finding somebody who would take it, and that I always see you as central to that change. What is that correct?
I
That
think
you were
there's-
in the middle of that
I think
that
there's
transition.
I can understand why people would think that I was in the middle of that transition,
Weren't you around that
Yeah,
period?
because what had happened was this: when you get elected or chosen, I guess is a better word. When you get chosen to be presiding elder, the term is 2 years. So 2008, 2009, those were my 2 years, and I said I will agree to come back for another year, but everybody needs to understand I'm done after that, and you're going to have to figure out a way to make this organization keep going, because I'm not going to be here to do that. And the thing was, I understand how people thought, okay, that's me, I'm trying to shut it down or whatever, except that everybody on the council felt the same way. We'd all been doing
talk a
it.
little bit about what led to the transition. You know,
We were all-
what
it
was
wasn't-
happening with the organization.
I know that it's shorthand to say these guys are burned out, but that's not what was happening.
Okay.
Now,
What was happening?
many of us have been doing this for a very long time, and I'm just going to say names, but there was Kim Pittman and Jennings Fort and Phil Ropes and Craig Cook and Tony James, George Miller, me. I mean, we had been this consistent core of people for a really long time. And the truth was that George was ready to move on. Kim felt like he'd done this as many times as he wanted to do it. Jennings was ready to move on. I mean, nobody was angry, and nobody ever used the words burned out in my presence. Nobody ever said, I'm burned out, and so I need to just be done with this. But we all just agreed that it was time to let a new generation. Because those of us who'd been there for a really long time, we had seen other people hand it off.
Yeah.
So we knew that that's what you do. And so that's what we agreed to do. And we all said, well, we'll stay on another year with the understanding that you're going to have to figure out, if you care about this organization, you're going to have to figure out how to make it go forward. Okay.
So y'all announced that to one of the conferences.
So they had an entire year
Yeah.
to do that. And there was a council retreat at the mountain in November of 2009, so that they would all know, everybody could get on the same page about it. And for me personally, I can't speak for the rest of these guys, except to say not a single one of them ever said I'm burned out.
Well, why would it be bad if they had said that? I'm not
I just think
understanding something.
I think there's a...
Weary is what I'm thinking burned out means. Like, you know,
It's the
somebody
way,
else's turn.
but I feel like it's the way people fill in the blanks sometimes when they don't really care what the truth is.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't burned out, but what I've told people who've really been curious and wanted to know, I've said, look, okay, I was presiding elder for 3 years. The year before that, the one before, okay, when we had a presiding elder who was struggling with depression and really couldn't fulfill the responsibilities, I had to do stuff for him.
Yeah.
And so that was almost 4 years of me doing this stuff. It was time for me to get off the stage. That's really all that's about. You don't want the same person. I mean, there's a reason why we don't have presidents for longer than 8 years.
Yeah. Right. No human can do this.
No.
Well, am I incorrect or correct that there was, at the same time, a critical mass of people in Asheville, or by that time, who might be able to get together person to person,
There were
and take it on.
there were still some people in Atlanta, and there were some people in various cities in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple of people in other places that said they would be part of it. And for me personally, I couldn't be part of an organization that does everything by conference call or email.
Mm-hmm.
I love to sit in a room face to face with people. And so the version that they have now is not something that I would do.
Okay.
But it's what they're making work for them.
Did you pick up on this idea that the conference planning had been just identified with Atlanta for so long, and it was kind of time for somebody else, for it not to be so identified with Atlanta people? Or am I making that part up? Was it not an Atlanta-centric kind of reputation?
It was Atlanta-centric,
Okay.
and it had been from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we were very good about inviting people outside Atlanta into the process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they might not have been able to do something until they got to the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
but they could still do something.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but yeah, it was always Atlanta-based, and
Okay. So, talk a little bit. I want to come back to this transition part, but talk about what it's like to be a conference planner person. What does that mean? What was it like for you specifically? Was it fun? Was it a lot of things besides the fun part? Was it exhausting? Was it what?
I loved it personally.
Okay.
Now, I will say...
What did you like about it?
Well, I loved the...
What parts of your personality dovetailed with what needed to be done that you liked?
I have, as I've told many people, I have some motherfucking organizational skills.
Okay.
And so I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you want me to pull this all together for you,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can do it.
Okay.
And so I enjoy that part of it. I love the conversations that we had around keynotes. You know, there'd be a list of 18 or 20 people to invite to be a keynote speaker, and we had to narrow that down to 3 because if the first one couldn't do it, then you had 2 backups. So I loved that whole process. I loved that you had to find ways to negotiate and compromise and come together. Because remember, we worked by consensus, which means everybody at the table has to agree before we're going to move forward on something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tricky, because that's not the way the world works. We were all raised in a country where it's majority rule.
Yeah.
And it's easy to undermine things if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved it. I mean, there were so many good ideas that got brought to the table, and also just the energy that I would see. You know, when people are very passionate about this, and I saw a lot of passion over the years, because we knew that what we were doing, we could set all these things in place, but you never knew how it was going to work until you got to the mountain.
Right. Then the magic takes over.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And then so there were just details and things, and I'm very detail oriented, and so I'm always looking at, you know, how can we fix this? And then, you know, there were things about it that used to make me laugh, like when I would do the orientation at the beginning of the conference, which was to give people the idea of like, here's what you can expect, and let me introduce these people to you, and here are the rules, and you can't walk around naked, and all that stuff. And I mean, it just grew. Every year, that list of things I had to share grew.
I wonder what that means.
I don't know, and they would just keep giving it to me, because
Yeah.
they would go, well, you'll make it funny. It'll be fine. You'll make it funny. And I guess that's true. I could make it funny. But there are people who didn't. You know what? If you get up in front of the room and you're the one who's like bringing order to everything and you're giving the rules, there are just going to be people who don't like you. And so there were people who did not like me, and I was aware of that.
Oh.
And I would read on the evaluations. One guy wrote one year, he goes, I guess it was okay, except for that control queen. So,
oh gosh.
you're not going to please everybody.
Yeah.
But I loved the process of sitting in a room for a council meeting, because they would be typically 4 hours until we started actual conference planning, and then they would go to 6 hours. So we would sit together, and I mean...
Where would you sit?
We would sit, originally we were at the Friends Meeting House, which was in the Quaker Church in Decatur. And then we moved to this little office space on Sheridan Road in Atlanta. And that one was... It had a bit of a different feeling from the Friends Meeting House space, but it was fine, and we were there quite a long time.
So y'all did not meet in each other's houses to do this?
Every once in a while, we would meet at somebody's house. Every once in a while.
Okay.
Like there'd just be some, I don't know, there'd just be some, crazy reason where we wouldn't do the thing at Sheridan Road, and we would go to somebody's house. I can remember one meeting. I don't know if I should tell this. Should I tell? I don't know. Do you have more questions?
We can edit it out. You can tell them to edit it out later if you want to.
All right. Okay, I'll tell the story.
Okay.
There was one year, and I remember this very, very, very specifically. It was January of 2004, and I was rejoining the council after having been off for a couple of years because I was living in California, and then I moved back. So January 2004, it's a pretty big council. Because it was January, and this was like the people who showed up were the ones who were saying, I want to commit to do this for the next year. So there were like 13 of us. And
this was at a conference?
No, this was a meeting, because you were asking about like the meetings and what's good about them. And okay, so there we were, there's 13 of us, it's January of 2004, and we have a special guest who wants to come in and speak to us. And it is somebody who used to be on the council, who had been on the council for many years. And he had an issue he wanted us to address. And the issue was that at the last conference, he had seen people he'd seen guys using drugs on the dance floor. And he wanted us to address that.
Okay.
And so he said all he wanted to say, and then he left. And there's 13 of us in this room who had to come to consensus about how to move forward on this. And I will tell you, it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, because I thought we were never, ever going to come to consensus on a policy about drugs and alcohol at the mountain. But we did. All these guys, we all came together, and we decided that Gay Spirit Visions events would be drug and alcohol free. We did that. 13 guys. And the funny thing was, everybody got there from a different way.
Oh, wow.
You had like 2 guys in recovery who were like, I just think this is a good idea. And then you had other guys who did stuff, and you had some people who said, I don't care, I don't drink or do drugs when I'm up there, but just don't ask me to be the police, because I'm not. So you had all that, and we came to that consensus. And so that's an example of how I thought we were never going to get there. And we did, and it didn't take us 4 hours.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to the transition time. What is your recollection of how that went? What your opinion of how it took or didn't take? How difficult it was? Whatever that ball of wax is. What's your observation of how that?
Well,
did you go to a conference after it got transferred over to the new folks?
I did not.
You didn't? Okay. So you didn't have immediate knowledge of how it worked or didn't work, but you probably were hearing plenty.
I heard a little, but not a lot.
Okay.
For the transition, so that last year when I was still presiding elder, 2010, 3 guys from the transition task force or whatever they were calling themselves then. 3 guys came on, and it was Paul Plate, Dennis Van Avery, and Jim Jones, Moondragon. And so the 3 of them came to the meetings so they could see like our process and what happens and what needs to be addressed and all that. And then as we got closer to the end of the year, we started to hand off all the stuff to them, so they would know, like, here's the password for this and here's the key for that, and here's a list of all the things that we do monthly. That's just administrative stuff that has to be taken care of. And I thought that the transition honestly went very smoothly.
Okay.
I mean, those three guys, I don't have anything negative to say about them. I think they're wonderful human beings. So again, I don't know what it looked like the next year.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think that as a council, I think we acted responsibly and with integrity in handing it off. We gave them a year. We assisted them along that way, and then we handed it off in good shape.
It doesn't get any better than that.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. All right. And then you decide your first conference after that was when you was 2000 was the 25th anniversary.
Yeah, I went back. Yes.
Okay. And so what was that like for you? What were you? I'm sure you were wondering if things had been preserved, if the best had been preserved, or if things had fallen out of. So what? Do you have an opinion?
I do have an opinion. I can say that absolutely the best had been preserved. I can say that. What else could I say about it? Just personally, I'd spent so many years working on things behind the scenes that I never really got to enjoy the conference.
Exactly.
I mean, it was just it was one thing after another. I mean, I can't, if I could sit here and tell you, like, give you 15 minutes worth of ridiculous questions that people brought to me thinking that I would be the only person who could answer them.
Like, where's the ice machine?
Like, yeah,
or?
just,
okay.
I lost my watch. Does your sacred fire have to burn all the time? Yeah, for like 20 years. Yeah, all those things So I had to answer all those questions, and then there was the mountain staff who would come that needed you to sign off on stuff too. So there was all that. I didn't have to do any of it. So I got to
participate.
I got to play, and I'm gonna say, this is what's really funny. I can remember all the contentious arguments we had in council about creating an intimacy space where guys could go off and
have sex,
whatever version of intimacy they want to have.
Yes.
I remember all those conversations and how tricky it was for us to get that space. Okay, I never got to use it until the 25th anniversary, and then I was in there 3 times.
Okay.
Just for the record.
Yeah. Nice to be a participant sometimes.
Yes, it was nice for me to let go of all that stuff. And the other thing that I saw happening was that I saw Scott Dillard was in charge, and I knew that behind the scenes there were things going on. It reminded me how easy I had actually had it. The 3 years I was the person that I worked with the best guys. Nobody ever tried to undermine me. Everybody was on the same page. Everyone was helpful.
Wow.
People would say, "No, David, you don't have to set up the chairs." So yeah, I mean, I was excited to go back, and I thought, again, you've picked a great keynote speaker with John Stasio. I love who's convening, Scott Dillard, and it's the 25th anniversary. I could not be prouder of you. You made it. Because, who knew when we handed it off whether it would last?
Right. Oh, great. Okay. So how could you describe what GSV has meant to you? I mean, that's a silly question in a way, but what are some of the ways that it's changed you? Are there friendships that wouldn't have been there otherwise? Who are some of those friendships that came from that are still in your life?
Yeah, there are. It certainly brought people into my life that I would not have met otherwise. And it's also had an impact on me, a very significant impact on me personally, in in several ways. So first, yes, I mean, there are just guys that I'm so thrilled that I've gotten to know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like Bob Strain or Dan Ellswick, and they're just people that I only maybe get to see them in a certain window of time, but when I'm there, I feel completely loved and supported, and I know that we can go off and have one of those private little quiet conversations by the fire, and it's going to be meaningful. So I love that.
Yeah.
And so how has it impacted me? Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, for the longest time, I identified as gay. And I think it's my involvement in Gay Spirit Visions that has allowed me to self-identify as queer.
How so? Well, how did that happen?
I feel like there have just been times when I've heard the word, because when we grew up hearing it in a very negative way.
Yeah.
But now as an adult, through interactions at Gay Spirit Visions, I've heard queer being used in a very positive way. And I've thought, you know, even as a kid, I knew people were trying to be disparaging of me, but I just don't object to that word. So I wonder if it's ever going to be okay. And for me, it's okay now. So I'm queer, and I pretty much have Gay Spirit Visions to thank for that. I just wish I could check that box, because it's never on a form. Isn't that weird? It's just never on a form.
No.
So there's that.
Yeah.
And is that those words mean different things to you, or is it just the word is different?
You know, for me, queer just means, you know, unusual, out of the ordinary, uncommon, and yeah, that's me. Yeah, I couldn't be normal if my life depended on it. It's just not going to happen. So I'm fine with queer, and I like to use that word. I use it when I'm blogging now, and I know that there are people who still get cringy about it, but I think that it's a word that we needed to take back, and it looks like we have, and good for us. So the other thing is, like I mentioned earlier, I think Gay Spirit Visions has also taught me something about integrity and the way I relate to men, and how easy it is sometimes to blow off somebody and not really tell them what you're doing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to fuck you. I didn't want to date you. I mean, there's a way to actually communicate that with integrity, and so I've learned that. And I think, again, Gay Spirit Visions, because there have been so many times when you've crossed paths with somebody. The world is a lot smaller. I know everybody thinks that those Armistead Maupin movies, or the Armistead Maupin books, are so contrived with all the people who keep intersecting and everything, but no, my life has been like that forever. So I'm always going to run into people that I've slept with or whatever, and I feel like you really need to develop some integrity around that. So that's been good for me too. And then the last thing is that Gay Spirit Visions taught me that I don't have to explain my spiritual path to you. I don't need you to validate it. I don't even need you to understand it. So if I choose to tell someone I'm agnostic and they don't understand what that means, I might direct them to a dictionary.
Yeah.
Or I might choose to, depending on who it is, I might choose to explain it to them. But I don't have any shame about saying that I'm an agnostic anymore, at all. No shame around being queer, no shame around being agnostic. I think those are gifts that I've gotten from Gay Spirit Visions.
Oh, interesting. Do you feel like the opportunities that you had and that you took to be to express your organizational skills, your performance skills, your writing stuff, whatever you feel like your talents are, that was supported by Gay Spirit Visions, or not particularly so? I mean, was that a proving ground for you? Was it a confidence building era? All of that work you did with GSV, or not particularly? I mean,
it took me a couple of years to kind of find my groove in Gay Spirit Visions. You know, the first few years on the council, I was not, I was setting up chairs. And then I finally kind of made that leap.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time I said, they were having, the person that was going to do the talent show, which was 96, he wasn't going to come. And there was all this panic because he'd done the talent shows, I think, from the beginning. And I was sitting, and it was one of those meetings we were in somebody's house, by the way.
Yeah.
It was Franklin Abbott's house.
Oh.
And we were sitting there, and they were, there was anguish around this decision. And I said, well, I could do the talent show. I think I could do it. And I remember thinking, well, there'll be this really long conversation about this. But John Stowe said, well, there you go. There's your answer.
Uh-huh.
So then I did it 5 years in a row.
Yeah.
So yeah, I always felt like if you stepped up and you volunteered and you didn't completely fuck it up, then they would. But I must have made some impression by that point, or I think they would have said no.
It would have prevented you from doing that. So would you say a small, medium-sized, or large proportion of your friendship network has come from GSV, or is it just tacked on to some other ones that were there long before GSV, and is it all just mixed up too much for you to know, or?
Some of it, I would say it's about half and half. I mean, I've certainly made a nice number of friends through Gay Spirit Visions over the years, but a lot of them don't live here, so I wouldn't call them close friends exactly. Okay. But and then also the other thing is that I have another group of friends, but I've lost so many people to AIDS that I've had to replenish. You're constantly reinventing yourself, and so now I have friends from GSV. I have friends that's survived or are HIV negative, and then I have friends that are people I went out and like I tried to make friends with somebody. Like I need something different that I'm not getting from these other circles. I need to go, and which is a real change for me because when I was a kid, I used to just wait for people to pick me.
Interesting. You may or may not want to talk about this, but I was wondering if you could tell from your point of view the story about you and the Minneapolis guy and the whole, how y'all found each other at that conference and how that went, or not, just what that was like. You were trying to, you did not expect to meet that person there. You were helping organize things, so I assume you were preoccupied with that, and then this thing came out of left field. So I thought that was a remarkable, sweet story, and I've always wondered what must have been like for you to have to fold that into what I assume you were being very preoccupied about.
Right.
So what was that? Am I making a lot of this up?
No, I don't mind talking about it. So what happened was that I met Greg from Minneapolis at a potluck here. It's a potluck in February of 2008.
Before the conference?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He had a friend who was being transferred here, and he came down with her to help her look for a house.
Okay.
And he had looked us up online, and he came to a potluck. And so after the potluck, that was in February, after the potluck, I got an email from him. And I thought, well, of course anybody can find an email address because it's, and so we emailed back and forth a bit, not like every day or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't talk on the phone. And he said, I think I'm going to go to the fall conference. I said, oh, well, that's good. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. We have a good speaker this year. And so he showed up, and I was already attracted to him.
Okay.
And so I had to explain, listen, I have a lot to do. So
don't take this personal.
So don't get your hopes up
Yeah.
about stuff.
Yeah.
But we did get to spend some time together, a little bit. And there was one time in one of the larger, it was during announcements one morning, he did something silly that involved me, and I blushed, which is probably not something I do terribly often. But we did, after that, we saw each other for 3 years. So I flew back and forth to Minneapolis. And what's funny is on the evaluation, here's what's funny. Because you remember I told you earlier about somebody writing things on the evaluation.
Yeah.
Because there's always somebody who's just, anyway, this person wrote regarding, because it couldn't have been about anybody else, it was regarding Greg and myself. They wrote, the romance was too much in our face.
I thought it was sweet.
Yeah, that's what everybody else said to me. It's because they'd seen me up there like running around like a crazy person for years and not having any like a moment to do these things, and so most people were completely on board.
Oh, no, that was a neat part of that. Okay, few more questions. Tell us about one of those people who's not alive anymore that you want to talk about because he's, for you, an important part of the GSV story, and he can't talk to us, so talk to the camera and us about this person. Or two, if you want. You don't have to pick one, but if you have somebody.
Where's that list is over here. I know I have somebody that I know that I definitely want to talk about.
Okay.
But it was when I first saw this list, I was, for a moment I had to realize that, we've really lost this many people, and it's a lot of people. There are just a couple. I mean, I've mentioned John Stowe, for instance, and how John Stowe and I were never close, but he was very pivotal for me. Because I think he could always just look and go, you need to loosen up. Or just the way he very casually goes, you can do the talent show. That all those kinds of things, you remember those. If you're a person who's kind of not quite sure of yourself, you remember those things. And so I loved John Stowe very much. And John Mungo, who was a keynote in, I want to say, maybe 2000. John Mungo was a sweet man, gentle. And I remember he also came back after the conference and he facilitated our council retreat. And he was just amazing in so many ways. And everybody, this is so funny, because a lot of times, because I dealt with him in some ways because of being on the council, but I also personally, I interacted with him on a personal level too. I had him over for dinner and things like that. And I'm surprised at how many people think that John Mungo and I must have had sex.
Oh, okay.
And that is not true.
Okay.
Just for the record, that is not true.
All right.
Not that I wouldn't have wanted it, but I did not make that move. So there was just something about it that didn't feel.
Now
right.
I don't remember knowing him, so tell me a little bit about what he was like.
Well, John Mungo was he was a sturdy guy with big arms and tattoos, and he was bald, but he had a red beard.
Okay.
And he was a psychotherapist. And there was just something, I think about him that made people just want to settle down. But yeah, he was. I hate to trivialize it, but he was just so adorable and he was good looking in this offbeat way.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
like a Paul Bunyan type person or something?
The lumberjack, like a lumberjack.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And you're like, he couldn't be a psychotherapist. That can't be right.
Uh-huh.
So,
Do you remember any incidents with him, or stories, or encounters in particular with him, about him that he was part of?
I don't remember a lot. I mean, one thing I remember was one night we were leaving. We left the treehouse together, and then in my head I remember thinking, I'm not sure how this is going to play out. Do I want to have? What if he invites me into his room? Do I want to have sex with him? And that was what was going on in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, really, you should just shut up in your head. Just shut up. And we were walking along, and it dawned on me that I had not said, look up. Because when you're on the mountain, you can actually see the stars.
Yeah.
They're fantastic. I mean, you can see constellations and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you need to look up. I just stopped right there and dead in my tracks and said, you need to look up.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that I redirected in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we walked back to his room, and we were in the same building. We were in the lodge, but I walked into his door, and he just leaned over and kissed me.
Mm-hmm.
And then said goodnight.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's all that needed to happen tonight.
Mm-hmm.
The stars and a very sweet kiss is all that needed to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's not probably what you wanted to hear.
No, I wanted to hear a story about him because I didn't know him.
Oh gosh, John Whidden. John Whidden was
He's
just
another
a big
person I don't know. So tell me.
John Whidden was like if you like the brawny paper towel man,
Yeah.
like from the 90s, the
Mhm.
80s and 90s. He had that kind of a look about him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, gosh, that smile could just melt you. And he was an artist, and I remember there was a year, I remember he came, and he had grown his hair out. So his hair was, long, like, at least like right here, okay. And in the dance that year, I had put Personal Jesus by the Depeche Mode song, Personal Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And he walked up on the stage, and he was wearing like, I said earlier people wear little pants or loincloths
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Mhm.
He had on this thing that looked like a little makeshift loincloth.
Mm-hmm.
And he walked up on the stage during that song, and he just threw his arms open.
A little magical moment.
It was, I will never forget that image of him, yes.
Oh, funny.
So the story that I really want to tell is about Crazy Owl.
Okay.
So, and there's two things about Crazy Owl. Okay, the first one is that there was one year, and I want to say it was 95 or 96, there was one year where we just had this unprecedented number of people there. It was like 147 people. It was just overwhelming and too much. And so at the closing heart circle, I was seated next to Crazy Owl, and somehow we had managed to be at the end. There were only like 2 or 3 more people after us, so we had to sit through 140 people doing this thing like this, back when we didn't put parameters on what people said.
Yeah.
So this just went on forever, and on and on. And they always tell you, don't rehearse what you're going to say, don't think about it too hard, just let it be spontaneous and heartfelt and all. And yeah, that's not me at all. So anyway, it goes all around, and finally it gets to Crazy Owl, who's sitting right next to me, and Crazy Owl says, I haven't had a bowel movement in 3 days until this morning, and that was the best bowel movement I can remember having.
Oh, God.
And the place just erupted in laughter for like 2.5 minutes. I mean, it was just laughter, laughter, laughter. And I thought, yeah, well, there's no reason to rehearse. And the only thing I could think to say was, I don't know how to follow a good bowel movement.
Well, that's perfect.
So there was that. But the other part of the story is that Crazy Owl, I think I want to say it was probably the year before, maybe 95. Crazy Owl he was either in a small group with me or in something else. I forget exactly. But anyway, I had told people that I was living with HIV. I'm HIV positive, and so I noticed that like the rest of the time that Crazy Owl just kept watching me, and so he'd just be there and he'd be watching me, and he would, and it sort of was creeping me out a little bit because I didn't know what that was about.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, there was one afternoon, we ended up in the stairwell of the treehouse together. I was coming up and he was coming down or something. And he stopped me, and I went, okay, here it comes.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, here it comes. And he stopped me and he said, I can cure your HIV. I can cure AIDS. That's what he said. And I went, oh, really? Well, okay. Who have you talked to about this? He goes, oh, well, I tried to talk to those people in Atlanta, the AIDS Atlanta, those people, and they wouldn't listen. And I said, oh, okay, all right. He goes, but I can cure your HIV, and I can cure AIDS. I said, all right, because I didn't know where to go with this after that. I'd already asked one question, the only thing I could think of. And so he reached into his pocket, and he's one of those guys who it could be 89 degrees, and he would wear, like, with those army jackets and long pants and all, and he had long gray hair and it was pulled back into a ponytail. So he reaches into this like army jacket and he pulls out a piece of paper and he hands it to me and he says, you call me. And it's written, it says Crazy Owl, and then there's a telephone number. And so I did not call him because I do not believe that he could cure HIV or AIDS. I do, however, believe that's how you get a name like Crazy Owl. But
did you ever go out to his compound?
I did not. Because I didn't know what was, and there's a part of me that wonders like what would have happened if I just let him do his thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't in that headspace at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So. But yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm keeping the memory of Crazy Owl alive. Although, and also he's you don't have this so much anymore. But there was a time when there were a lot more like spirit names.
Yes. And
then there are now, and so Crazy Owl was one of them, and he
lived up to his name.
He did. He absolutely did.
Did you ever have a spirit name?
I did not. I think everybody was always afraid to give me one. Because it would have to go through a process to be proved.
Okay, so what advice would you give to somebody who's about to attend his first GSB conference? What would you say if you were sending him off to it? What would you?
I'd say you might want to lower your expectations, and
You mean like not have any or not have?
Too much. I don't know if I'd say don't have any, but however you've built this up in your head, I'd just say lower it, because it's never, you don't know. I mean, the only reason I sort of know what's going to happen is because I've planned it for a bazillion years.
Yeah.
But I think if it's your first time and you're worried about like they're going to make me eat a chicken or something, I don't know what's going to happen, then I would say you might want to just lower your expectations and go with it, and also just find somebody to. There will be somebody you'll find energetically. There'll be somebody there that you'll be able to relate to. I guarantee that.
Okay. So who else do you think we should talk to if we're trying to get the most comprehensive picture we can of what this is and was?
Oh, I do think talking to Al Cotton would be a good idea, only because he was important in the beginning of it. That first, whereas he was important in the first 8 to 10 years. I mean, I think my importance happened after that, so he may have some things to share about the beginning.
Okay.
I don't know if you could get. I would love to know what Bruce Parrish thinks about all this, but I'm not sure you could get him to do it.
I'm sorry to hear that, because I was planning to ask him. Okay.
Well, I'd say go ahead and you mind. I mean, he's one of those people who would go, I prefer not to answer that. Could predict that about him.
Okay.
Clearly, I didn't care, but
No, right. Okay. So I think that's all I'm gonna ask, but I want to be sure, really sure, that you have a chance to say whatever we didn't cover or we didn't go anywhere near that you wanted us to or thought we should, because you're the one who this is about. This is about your experience with GSV. So I don't want to artificially hack off a whole part of it that you might want to talk about.
I feel like I covered a bunch of things.
Did we leave out a whole avenue that you wish we had gone down?
No, I was really surprised that you asked about that transitional period. I was surprised about it, but I've never had any problem talking about it, so that didn't bother me at all.
And it's just been a long interest of mine, because I was holding my breath to see, like a lot of people probably were, is that going to work or is it going to die now? And it didn't. And so, since you were there, I wanted to ask about that.
I would only say this. This is not something we covered exactly, but in those, from the very beginning, when I first started, and it was called the Planning Committee,
Mm-hmm.
you arrived at decisions by consensus. And then that always stayed throughout my tenure up through 2010.
Mm-hmm.
We always worked by consensus. And it's not for everybody. Consensus is very tricky for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who would join the council, and they have a fantastic experience at the mountain, and then they think, I want to be able to relive this over and over again, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to join the council. And that's not where you you don't get the mountain experience from being on the council.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't. And they would struggle with consensus, and we had people over the years that would try to circumvent it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of times, but every once in a while you get somebody who would try to circumvent it. And you also got people who would join the council and they had one issue.
Mm-hmm.
And they were determined that we were going to discuss that issue, and that we were going to see the light.
Uh-huh.
And it, again, I can think of one thing in particular, and I kind of hesitate to share it, but there was one thing that came up over and over again, and we could never get to consensus on it.
Wow. Wow. If you have an opinion about this, I'd like to hear what you have to say about what to some people sort of looks like a pendulum that goes back and forth between a lot of organization and letting it happen, and rigid versus loose, and trusting the magic versus organizing it to death. Do you see the organization at one of those extremes now, or do you agree with that?
Well,
That's always a tension in the planning.
I can certainly tell you that it became more structured as the organization grew.
Okay.
A lot more structured, and because of the makeup of the council, people who came on with certain skills,
Mm-hmm.
and then invited us to look at things in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the beginning, when I was first around, 92, 93, 94, not that, okay, that felt very loose. And when I look at the brochure or the rundown of activities and stuff, and I see how things were structured and how it's all laid out and all, I see, okay, well, we actually got more professional, and we started to do things that made more sense to
Uh-huh.
us. But the other thing that happened was, we got serious about certain things, because in 95 we incorporated, and after incorporation we registered with the state of Georgia as a 501c3 nonprofit, and that meant you had to name officers.
Right.
So, and then someone came on to the council. It was Jim Faison, he was a lawyer who came on and said, we should really try this. So bylaws, and then let's write down how people get to these positions, and then you might want to have a mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
And so all that stuff happened like bam, bam, bam after 95. And so for some people who just don't want to do that, then that probably looked like a lot of structure, and it made them nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, we came from a radical fairy tradition,
Right.
which is kind of freewheeling.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a lot of structure.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's just how the council evolved. It evolved into people who just wanted everything in order,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm comfortable with that. I don't think everybody's comfortable with it,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the way that GSV ran for a long time. I don't know what it looks like now,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't want to compare the two. I can only say I couldn't do what they're doing, where they're just talking on the phone and conference calls and they're doing everything. I like sitting down at a table physically and looking you in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I tend to believe about that is people are less likely to lie to you or fuck with you if you're looking them in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would have to say from beginning to when I handed it off in 2010, it absolutely got more structured.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not appealing to everybody. And you know, and especially having a lawyer come on and say,
Mm-hmm.
I just took the liberty of drawing up these bylaws that are 11 pages long for you all to read. Not everybody wanted to see it. I can tell you an interesting story about the mission statement.
Okay.
Right. So the mission statement, when I first came onto the organization, there was one of these little pamphlets,
Yeah.
and it didn't have a mission statement. It had something called a statement of gay spirit visions, which goes on quite a bit. And in the middle of it, it says furthermore. Now, if your mission statement includes the word furthermore, you might want to rethink it.
Yeah.
So I do specifically recall at the 99 council retreat at the mountain, there were 15 of us. And we decided that we were going to write a mission statement. Yep, we were going to write a mission statement to be introduced in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was the millennium and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
everybody was so excited. Remember that? Remember how excited we all were about it? So yeah, we wrote this, and here's what happened with this thing. 15 of us in the room, and we got up, we had one of those boards, one of those dry erase boards, and people had phrases or words that they wanted in. So we wrote down phrases and words and things, and then 3 of us went downstairs to the library in the lodge, and we tried to put something together.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 3 of us, it was me and Ramon Noya,
Mm-hmm.
who's just one of the most delightful men that's ever lived, and Matt Huff, who was at the time pretty much the youngest guy who'd ever been part of GSV.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went downstairs and we put all this stuff together, and we wrote it out and all. And then we came upstairs and we wrote out what we had written on the dry erase board, and then the room got to say, take that out, or oh my God, that doesn't need to be there,
Yeah.
or what were you thinking, or something. So we did this, and actually we wrote that. So it was a mission statement, pretty much by committee.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And I always remember that.
Like the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah,
Y'all going off and writing that.
Yeah.
3 of you.
yeah. It was a lot of fun, but it was a little bit scary because
Yeah.
people can get all worked up about
Oh, yeah.
those things, and
Very attached to certain words.
it needs to have this word in it, and it's just got to.
Okay. Do you have anything in your pile of things that you want to explain to the camera, what they are? And can we make copies of them if we don't have them for the archives?
If you don't have them in the
Yes.
archives, I'm pretty sure I've got copies of these. I'll give you.
Okay.
So this was the original pamphlet,
Really? I don't think I've ever even seen that.
and this is the one that we redid it, and it came out this way.
Okay, that one.
And
is-
as you can see, this one, our mission statement's on the back.
Okay.
And here's one of the biggest improvements we made. We made the type big so you could read it. Yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Okay.
So And also, what's really cool about these is they do have a little bit of the history, and it talks about names, and it talks about how we started from the Radical Ferry tradition, and then it was the group of guys who bought the property, Running Water Farm, and then they incorporated, and they called, the incorporated name was Stepping Stone, and the very first conference was funded by Stepping Stone. They gave us the money to do that in 1990. So that part of the history never needs to be lost. We always need to know where we came from. And I know some people don't know that, but yes, it's spelled out. So, so
What
I
else
can't
you-
really
what
think
else?
of. I don't know if I've pretty much said. I wouldn't trade any of the years, even the worst year, even the year when the council was so dysfunctional we had to go to therapy together. I wouldn't trade that year. I'm not making that up either. Let me just say there was a year when we went to therapy.
Well, what were some of the impasses? What were they about? Were they about
It was
process?
personality conflict.
I see. Okay. Okay. And you got through it.
We did.
Oh, good. Good. So you had to bring in a facilitator?
We did. We brought in John Ballou.
Okay. I think he may have been brought in again.
I'm
not sure.
He was last year.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
He was, yes, indeed.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.